you care about Mother Earth and it's about Mother Earth, and you're going up in a spaceship that is built and paid for by a company that's single-handedly destroying the planet. Look at the state of the world and think about how many resources went into putting these women into space. For what? What was the marketing there? And then to try to make it like, I'm disgusted. Literally, I'm disgusted.
So recently we were all witnesses to a historic day. A millionaire pop star flew into space on the rocket ship of one of the most rich and powerful men in the world. And obviously, as we all felt, it was an absolutely inspirational story of what you can achieve if you have access to vast amounts of wealth. Now, I want to talk about today basically the pretty muted reaction to something I feel like the early 2010s would have loved. Like, if Jeff Bezos and Katy Perry in like actually 2010, I think nearly every single person would have like absolutely loved it. Now everyone fucking hates it because the world is a hellscape dystopia, and the economic disparity between the rich and poor is growing increasingly obvious even to those in wealthier Western nations. So when we see a stunt like this, first of all, we all ask ourselves, why the fuck should we care in the first place? Because we could never afford to do something like that. And also, we're just dealing with everyday problems. We don't have the luxury about thinking, maybe one day I myself could participate in space tourism, which needs you to be rich in the first place. But although I am saying that there has been a pretty muted reaction to this overall, like people like, why should we care? We should care. Now, we shouldn't care about Katy Perry going into space, and we shouldn't care about like how Jeff Bezos is trying to use some sort of girl boss feminism with Katy Perry to paper over the real problem, which we should care about, and that's the increasingly privatized nature of the exploration of space. Something that I'm sure a lot of you will agree should be something done at the very least by nation states. And as flawed as our systems are, at least there is some degree of civilian input and accountability to space travel done by governments rather than just done by giant private corporations run by two of the richest men on Earth, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, but also other billionaires like Richard Branson. And I just want to talk about like history as well, and the early exploration of either Asia or the New World by European settlers and these massive giant corporations at the time, and what that resulted in, and how we're going to see that kind of play out again, obviously not involving actual human beings or aliens, but increasingly corporations traveling to areas that haven't previously been controlled by certain countries and establishing their own sort of kingdoms is the main fear with people like Musk and Bezos, and ruining other planets and space travel, because capitalism doesn't seem to want to be contained by the planet Earth. It's not content with ruining just one planet. It's probably going to ruin a handful. And it just sucks that when we see like, I guess, Soviet propaganda about space travel and how like utopian that looks compared to the actual reality of what space travel is becoming, is seriously depressing for people like myself, and I'm sure many of you, who genuinely love space. We love science fiction because we love space, and humans have always been fascinated about like what it would be like to live outside this planet, looking at things like the moon or Mars or all the planets we can see from planet Earth. And now that dream is being ruined by insecure man baby tech bros who just seem to want all the attention on them, and that's the driving reason they do shit like this. So just going to talk about all of this today. Before we go any further, check me out on social media at the Kavernacle, on Blue Sky, on Instagram. Support me on YouTube memberships and support me on Patreon. And let's get more into the video. So I'm sure, like many of you, I didn't really know the details about like the ins and outs of this, so I'll read you it quick, just because a lot of us just pay attention through like social media feeds, not actually reading about it or watching it. So The Cut had an article by Olivia Craighead and Bindu Bansanath, everything you need to know about that all-woman space trip. So on Monday, an all-female crew headed to space for the first time since 1963, when Valentina Tereshkova manned a solo space flight, obviously for the Soviet Union, also the first woman in space. This time, things looked a little different. This crew went up in a suborbital rocket by Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' aerospace company, and notable names on the flight included Bezos' fiancée, Lauren Sanchez, Katy Perry, and Gayle King. So in addition to Jeff Bezos' fiancée, Perry and King, 3 other women went along. Aisha Bo, a former rocket scientist, Amanda, I'm going to butcher this Vietnamese name, Nguyen, bioastronautics research scientist and activist focused on victims of assault, and film producer Carrie Ann Flynn. You've probably seen all the footage about Katy Perry returning, and she said,
"It is the highest high, and it is surrender to the unknown, trust, and this whole journey is not just about going to space. It's the training, it's the team, it's the whole thing. I couldn't recommend this experience more. This is like up there with all the different tools that I've learned in my life, from meditation to the Hoffman process. This is up there because what you're doing is you're like really finding the love for yourself, because you got to trust in yourself on this journey. And then you're feeling the love when you come down, for sure. And you're feeling that strength. So I feel really connected to that strong, divine feminine right now. It's not about me. It's not about singing my songs. It's about a collective energy in there. It's about us. It's about making space for future women and taking up space and belonging. And it's about this wonderful world that we see right out there and appreciating it. This is all for the benefit of Earth.
So I want to talk about that a little bit, because I'm going to take my cynic hat off for a brief second and talk about the positive. So obviously people like Amanda Nguyen, it's a very nice moment for someone like that to get to experience something they dreamed of doing. So that's a nice touch. And if I'm going to read this on a very surface level, a crew of all women going to space, I think maybe for little girls and children, can be a nice thing. And I know maybe some would be more interested in space because of this, because when you're a kid, you don't think about either the wider implications, you just see what it is on the surface. It's an all-women crew going up to space, and you too could be a female astronaut, although there have been plenty going back to the early days of the space race. At the same time, we have really not seen a lot of this, especially in my lifetime. Like, space seems to have really regressed as a focus for many governments like Russia and the United States. So yes, on a very surface level, I understand why people might like this, find it somewhat inspirational, but if you're probably a bit older, it just rings as very hollow, and it's a PR stunt for Jeff Bezos' company. Obviously, his fiancée is on the flight as well, and it's basically using liberal identity politics to sanitize something which to me is very sinister. It's the increasing privatisation of space, which is ensuring that for 99% of people, it won't be accessible ever, basically. Until Elon Musk creates some sort of like voluntary serfdom on Mars, your average person is not really going to space anytime soon. And obviously I hate capitalism anyway, but in terms of space especially, why this is sad is because, like I said, capitalism hasn't really touched outside this planet. So for all the damage it has been doing to the planet Earth, including absolutely destroying its environment, ensuring that future generations are going to find it harder to live here, and maybe one day the Earth won't even be habitable by humans because of what capitalism and what these giant corporations are doing to it. But it feels like outside Earth there was a chance of a new future where humanity worked together, and that has even been the spirit of space travel and just the collaboration between different countries who might hate each other on planet Earth when they're up there. So a big example, even right now, is Russia and the United States. Russian and American astronauts still work together on the International Space Station and still collaborate very closely, because that is in the spirit that was, I guess, towards the end of the Cold War, that space isn't about national borders. It isn't about these identities we formed on planet Earth. We're just humans up there, and we should act as humans, and we should help each other as humans. And isn't that like a really nice thing to move towards? And that's what a lot of communists want generally, like, to recognize that we are human, and once you're up there looking down, you can see the Earth for what it is. And these borders we've all created for ourselves, these religions, these identities, they're human made, and they shouldn't restrict us in forming like a peaceful future. And it actually reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 3. Now, it's a 20-year-old game, but a remake is coming out in August. If you don't want Metal Gear Solid 3 spoiled for you, it's not a massive spoiler, but please don't listen to this part. Basically, one of the main characters in Metal Gear Solid 3 was the first person in space. Obviously not a real person, but it's a woman called the Boss. She went up to space and she tells Snake how it made her feel, and it actually informed her whole ideology, which forms like a central narrative in the game because it has all these other characters fighting over what her legacy is. And even with Big Boss later on, his like private military company's logo is Pangea, because it's about basically all being one as a human race. I'll play a little clip from Metal Gear Solid 3 for you.
In 1960, I saw a vision of the ideal future from space. I could see the planet as it appeared from space. That's when it finally hit me. Space exploration is nothing but another game in the power struggle between the US and the USSR. Politics, economics, the arms race, they're all just arenas for meaningless competition. I'm sure you can see that, but the Earth itself has no boundaries. No East, no West, no Cold War. And the irony of it is, the United States and the Soviet Union are spending billions on their space programs and the missile race, only to arrive at the same conclusion. In the 21st century, everyone will be able to see that we are all just inhabitants of a little celestial body called Earth. A world without communism or capitalism, that is the world I wanted to see.
So I just feel in that spirit, Bezos, Musk, Branson, they're just really perverting this stuff and making it a vehicle for their own, image and their own wealth. And it's just sickening because this is not what space travel should be about. We should have learned from the sins of the past that capitalism is going to doom us on planet Earth. It shouldn't be the capitalist class who are destroying the planet, leading us into space. But now let's talk about the class element of this all. And this is why people really can't give a shit. So I saw this, someone post, Katy Perry exiting the rocket capsule and Housing for All is hot wrote, I saw someone eating out of a trash can today. Someone else saying, Americans can't afford eggs and there's multiple genocides going on, but yeah, more circus, I guess. And obviously I completely agree with the sentiment. And what was so weird about this is Gil Scott-Heron made a song called Whitey on the Moon in response to the moon landing. And obviously this is centered a lot on race. The class element means it's just entirely relevant still today. I'm going to read you some of the lyrics quick. So, I can't pay no the bills, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. The man just upped my rent last night because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. So the song basically goes on like that, but it's just making, the commentary that while white people are going to the literal moon, black people are still increasingly facing just poverty because of systemic racism. And obviously that was more stark in the 1960s. It's still very relevant today in terms of the racial angle, but in terms of the class angle, that's why so many people just don't give a shit about this. Because if you can't afford your bills, seeing a billionaire, the richest man on earth, run a rocket ship that flies celebrities, his fiance, into space, and we're all meant to be impressed, why do we care? The world is just this hellscape right now, and even in America right now, there's so much terrible shit going on, and you're thinking with people like Jeff Bezos, if you actually cared about humanity, what are you doing to help humanity on planet Earth? You're doing fucking nothing. You're actually making humanity worse, and you're actually helping to destroy the planet. So why should we be impressed by this, and why the fuck should we care? In terms of this is talking about Whitey on the moon with NASA, Neil Armstrong and stuff. But take it to the 2025 context. It's billionaire in space. Why should poor people care about that? Why should any of us who could never hope to achieve that wealth, why should we care about that? That future is not for us. We're never going to be able to afford that. We're never going to go into space. We're never going to be on these crews with billionaire fiancés going into space as part of a PR stunt. So in terms of the class angle, this has been something that has been talked about in space travel for a long, long time. Obviously, we have seen multiple people of different races, including African Americans, go into space. But the class element will remain that for loads of us, that is never going to be something that's going to be achievable. And the only time poor people will be in space is when they become a new serf class for billionaires on their Mars colony. Now let's move into the last part of this video, and I want to talk about this a little bit as well. So obviously European colonialism is the root of so many problems in the world today, and what happened early on was a lot of it was driven by essentially what we'd understand as private enterprise and corporations. So it was Elizabeth I that allowed the East India Company to form, who then obviously went to India. And it wasn't just a trading company, it was a giant corporation that had its own military that basically colonized India and paved the way for the British colonization of India. So if you guys don't know, the British didn't actually directly control India until after the Indian uprising. I think it's in 1857, were recognized by many as their first war of independence against the British. And that's when the British came in and was like, yeah, we're getting rid of the East India Company, but we're replacing them. Because the East India Company essentially acted like it was its own country in India itself, controlling so many aspects of different Indian territories and using military force to basically make sure no one could oppose them. Obviously, we have Columbus, who went around Europe asking different monarchs, like, will you fund my trip to try and find a different route to India? Obviously, he eventually found the Americas and all the shit he did there, right? So all of this stuff back in the day was financed by Europe's most wealthy people to do this exploration. What happened is when these people got to these places, which were inhabited but not as well known by European monarchs, they started setting up their own like de facto countries away from centralized governments. And of course, what happened in places like South America, that actually led to these massive uprisings and wars against the Spanish and Portuguese crowns, because they're like, yeah, we are our own new nation. And the new aristocracy in those countries was like, we don't want to pay taxes back to Spain or whatever. We have this new place. So why I'm saying all that right now is because space for me is going to be just like that. Obviously, we're probably not going to find other living beings out there. So thankfully, they're not going to suffer like the natives suffered in the Americas or the Indians suffered at the hands of the British and the East India Company. But what is going to happen is, because it's being driven by private enterprise and these people trying to break away from national governments who aren't even held accountable by these governments in the first place, like Columbus, like the East India Company, they're just going to set up their own colonies that won't be accountable, and they'll just create these new states for themselves that will just be terrible for everyone, right? And they'll entice people to go because of their love of things like space. But what will essentially happen is, and what I fear for maybe 300, 400 years in the future, the whole of the planets around us are just going to be owned by different corporations. And that's the future for humanity. The future of humanity isn't working together to explore the stars and set up new countries and new places where everyone's equal, where we can live without the shackles of planet Earth, where we can actually imagine a better world that isn't capitalist hell. No, it's going to be even worse. It's going to be corporations actually owning parts of planets where they will dictate every single law there, and they won't be accountable to anything because they won't even have to pay attention to governments back in Earth and stuff. So that's what I think stuff like this signals. And maybe someone in the future is watching this on their tablet in the Mars colony that was started by Elon Musk. And I'm just sorry we couldn't change it before it got to that point. And I really fear that is actually going to be the future. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about privatized space travel and just all these stupid stunts. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.